we're about to reflect on a great and powerful story of heroism in the Old Testament. All summer long, we're going to be looking at the giants of the faith that have gone before us and set an incredible example for faithfulness and courage, ones that built a foundation for all the faithful who would follow. Esther is one such story. To get us going, I'm going to just pull out of my pocket a blindfold here. And this is a simple question, but it's one that we often get tripped up on in matters of faith. If I go like this and put this blindfold on, you're all still there, right?
No.
Of course, you're all still there. Just because I can't see doesn't mean that you no longer exist. It doesn't mean that this room no longer exists. Now, I may have some difficulty navigating, like I might bump into Rich up here and step on his toe or something like that. But the fact remains that you're all still here, the room is still here, everything is still here just as it is, regardless of whether I can see. Now, why is that important? Why is that a lesson of faith for today? Is that Esther is in the Jewish exile, the Persian Empire, and it's one of the only books, probably the only book in all of Scripture that makes no overt mention of God at all. There's no reference to the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, save for this one verse that we have. There's no talk about God's will and plan, save for this one scripture that we've read today. And it's super important for our discussion this morning because the reality is that in this Persian culture, where all things of God and God's will and God's plan are pushed underground, under current, and all that we can see is the palace intrigue of kings and royal houses and plots. It's like many places in our own lives today. God is not right out in front when we enter into the marketplace, when we enter into the town square, when we enter into the broader culture. We have to remember that even when we can't see God, God's will and plan is still being worked out. And the choice remains for us, as it remained for Esther for all time, is are we going to jump in with courage and play a part? Or are we going to stand by and let things happen? Esther, the story of her heroism, is really remarkable. She starts out as an orphan Jewish girl, exiled in an exiled land with an oppressed people. And by some circumstances and twisting and turning, she becomes a member of the royal house. Indeed, she becomes queen. And it comes to light that there's a plot to destroy the Jewish people. Esther has privilege. She has power. She has safety and security. When the plan comes to light, she's asked for help. And the choice is for her to remain with prestige and power and safety and security in the royal house and not rock the boat, or go to the king and plead on behalf of the Jewish people that are going to be destroyed. Now, the thing that really shows Esther's courage is that anybody who goes before the king without being summoned is killed. If the king favors it, he will just kill whoever comes before him unsummoned. The chances of Esther going before the king, making a plea to save the Jewish people and survive are slim to none. And that's where we come to our scripture verse for this morning. Her relative, her uncle, Esther, Mordecai, Esther's uncle, is pleading with her to intervene for the salvation of the Jewish people. And as you can get from the little bit that we read in the scripture, her first answer is no. Her first answer is, I'm not going to stick my neck out. And so, Mordecai sends back word and says, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, he goes on, but that you may have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Look at this choice before her. Save all that she is and all that she has, her prosperity, her safety, her security, her royalty, or extend herself on behalf of the Jewish people. Mordecai reminds her that God's will and plan is an undercurrent in motion that will not be stopped or turned aside, and Esther's part is to choose whether to be a hero in it or to perish, and somebody else will be raised up as the hero. But make no mistake, God's will be done. That's what we get from this scripture. So, those remarkable words, I will go before the king, and if I perish, I perish, indicates that heroic and courageous and faithful commitment to stand for someone, in this case, group of people who can't stand for themselves, who are vulnerable, who are oppressed, who are facing injustice. And notice she does not go unprepared. Even though this book of Esther does not reference overtly the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the law and the prophets, the things that are staples of what we usually read in the Old Testament, with Old Testament heroes, she abides by the principles and the practices of faith discipline. She calls for a fast and for prayer. She herself fasts and prays. And the end of the story is a happy ending. She goes before the king and makes her plea. And the king shows favor. The Jews are saved. The plot is foiled. In every generation, God calls for faithful, courageous heroes to stand up and stand for folks who can't stand up or stand for themselves. It's God's will and God's plan for salvation, not for destruction. For hope, not for despair. In our last century, the 20th century, a story similar is the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. An incredible example of faith, hope, and love. A German pastor in Nazi Germany wrote the book, The Cost of Discipleship, among many other contributions to the Christian faith. If you know the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you know that he grew up and enjoyed the comfort and security of his aristocratic family. He played piano, he studied literature and art, and he followed in the footsteps of his father, who was a pastor. But during Nazi Germany, the Nazi Party co-opted so many of the churches to push their political message. And so a conflict arose between churches that resisted and churches that were co-opted by the Nazi Party. Dietrich Bonhoeffer led the charge resisting Nazi influence in the church. When he was found out, his work was stopped, and he fled to the United States, where he took a lectureship at one of the American seminaries. But after being in America for a short period of time, he's quoted as saying this: "I have made a mistake in coming to America. I must live through this difficult period in our national history with the Christian people of Germany. I will have no right to participate in the reconstruction of Christian life in Germany after the war if I do not share the trials of this time with my people." And if you know the story, he returned to Germany, joined the resistance movement that focused on saving the Jews from the Holocaust. He was discovered and imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp and spent 2 years until on April 9th, 1945, he was hanged, a few months before the German surrender of the war. This is an incredible story of faith and faithfulness, of courage and heroism, not unlike Esther's. To stand in a place where you're risking everything to save a people that are having everything taken from them. He had the safety, the security, the prosperity to turn a blind eye and do nothing. But instead, he said, "If I perish, I perish." Esther, Bonhoeffer, faithful Christians unnamed in every generation face this same choice. We face the same choice. It's our challenge as well. We who live here in Toms River, New Jersey, by world standards, enjoy safety, security, prosperity. It's easy to say, "I'm not sticking my neck out for those over there who are facing injustice and oppression." But if someone from our community of faith doesn't stand up, God will stand somebody up from somewhere else. Because God's will and plan, like an ever-flowing undercurrent in all things at all times, is going to be done. Our choice is, are we going to stand up with it and for it and be used by God for greatness and heroic, faithful purposes? Or are we going to stand by and protect our own safety and security? Every hero story has risk. Every hero story has a purpose greater than themselves. God has a great hero story for all of us. There is no shortage of those in need, those oppressed, those vulnerable, those facing injustice. There is no shortage of places for people, for heroes, for faithful folks to stand and to stand for God's grace, God's hope, God's love, God's salvation, God's courage, God's promise. Let's pray together. God, we are thankful this day because we have had your will and your plan revealed to us through Scripture, through the faithful who have gone each generation before us, through your Spirit that speaks into our hearts and into our community of faith constantly. You have revealed to us your will and your plan. To save, not to destroy. To hope, not to despair. To love, not to hate or neglect or to oppress. Give us the courage to stand for your promise and reflect your love to every dark corner of this world. May we be courageous enough to risk so that others may gain, and that in so doing we can take our place next to Esther, next to Bonhoeffer, and so many others, as those who have done your will faithfully. And God, we pray together this day the prayer that Jesus taught his followers to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. As a forgiven and reconciled people called to give our lives, let's make our offerings to God this morning.